I was standing in my driveway at 6 a.m., still in my pajamas, staring at the sheriff's deputy who had just handed me foreclosure papers. Over paint. Black paint. "Ma'am, you have 30 days to vacate the premises," he said, his voice almost apologetic. "The HOA has filed a lien against your property for unpaid fines, totaling $47,000. $47,000 for painting my house black." My hands were shaking as I looked at the papers, the legal jargon blurring through my tears. 6 months ago, I thought I'd found my forever home in Willowbrook Estates, a quiet suburban neighborhood where my daughter Emma could ride her bike safely, where I could finally have the garden I'd always dreamed of, where we could heal from everything we'd been through. But I made one mistake, one simple decision that would turn my American dream into a living nightmare. I painted my house black, and Patricia Morrison, the HOA president with her perfectly manicured nails and her clipboard of doom, was going to make me pay for every single brushstroke. What she didn't know was that I wasn't just going to fight back, I was going to expose every dirty secret she'd been hiding behind those pristine white picket fences. Because sometimes, when they push you to the edge, the only way out is to drag them down with you. Let me take you back to the beginning, to a time when I still believed in happy endings. My name is Sarah Chun, and 18 months ago, my world fell apart. My husband David died in a car accident. A drunk driver ran a red light and took away the love of my life, the father of our 8-year-old daughter Emma. The grief was suffocating, but what made it worse was losing our home. David's medical bills from his final weeks, the funeral costs, the lawyer fees, it all added up to a mountain of debt that buried us alive. Emma and I had been living in a cramped one-bedroom apartment for 6 months when I got the call that changed everything. David's life insurance policy, the one we'd forgotten about from his old job, had finally been processed. $500,000, enough to buy us a fresh start. I remember the first time I drove through Willowbrook Estates. It was like stepping into a postcard. Tree-lined streets with perfect sidewalks, houses that looked like they belonged in a magazine, kids playing hopscotch while their parents chatted over white picket fences. Emma pressed her face against the car window, her eyes wide with wonder. "Mommy, can we really live here?" she whispered. "Maybe, baby," I said, my heart swelling with hope for the first time in months. "Maybe we can." The realtor, Janet, was a bubbly woman in her 50s who spoke in exclamation points. "Oh, you're going to love this community," she gushed as we pulled up to 1247 Maple Street. The HOA keeps everything absolutely pristine. There are rules, of course, but they're really just to maintain property values and keep the neighborhood beautiful. The house was perfect, a charming 2-story colonial with white siding, black shutters, and a wraparound porch that begged for a porch swing. Emma ran through the empty rooms, her laughter echoing off the walls, and I could picture us here, really living again, not just surviving. "The HOA fee is only $200 a month," Janet explained as we stood in the kitchen, "and they handle all the landscaping for the common areas. Plus, they have the most wonderful community events, Easter egg hunts, summer barbecues, Halloween parties. Your daughter will make so many friends." I signed the papers that afternoon. The first few weeks were blissful. Emma started at Willowbrook Elementary and came home every day with stories about her new friends. I threw myself into unpacking and decorating, slowly transforming the generic white walls into something that felt like home. The neighbors were friendly. The Johnsons to our left brought over a casserole. The Millers to our right offered to help with yard work. But there was one thing I couldn't shake: how sterile everything looked. Every house was some variation of white, beige, or cream. The only pops of color came from the carefully regulated flower beds, tulips in spring, marigolds in summer, mums in fall. It was beautiful, but it felt empty, soulless. David had always loved bold colors. Our old house had been painted a vibrant blue that made him smile every time he came home from work. Life's too short for boring colors, Sar. he used to say. When you walk up to your house, it should make you happy. That's when I decided to honor his memory in the most fitting way I could think of. I was going to paint our house black, not a gloomy, depressing black, but a rich, sophisticated charcoal that would make our white trim pop and give our home the personality it deserved. I should have read the HOA covenants more carefully. The trouble started on a sunny Tuesday morning in May. I was in the front yard, planting Emma's favorite flowers, bright yellow sunflowers that would tower over our porch by summer's end, when I heard the sharp click of heels on concrete. "Excuse me." I looked up to see a woman in her late 50s approaching my driveway. She was dressed like she was headed to a country club board meeting. Crisp white blouse, navy blazer, not a hair out of place despite the slight breeze. In her perfectly manicured hands, she carried a clipboard and wore an expression that could have curdled milk. "I'm Patricia Morrison, president of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association," she said, her voice carrying the kind of authority that expected immediate compliance. "We need to discuss your decorating choices." "I'm sorry." I stood up, brushing dirt from my gardening gloves. "Is there a problem?" Patricia's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Well, there's the matter of your house color. The HOA covenants clearly state that all exterior paint colors must be approved by the Architectural Review Committee before application. Your house is currently in violation of Section 4.2.1 of our community guidelines." I felt my stomach drop, but I haven't painted anything yet. This is the original color from when we bought the house. "Oh no, dear," Patricia said, her tone dripping with condescension. "I'm talking about your plans to paint it black. Mrs. Henderson mentioned she overheard you discussing it with the paint store clerk at Home Depot last weekend." My blood ran cold. Mrs. Henderson was our across-the-street neighbor, a woman I'd waved to politely, but barely spoken with. The idea that she was reporting my private conversations to the HOA felt like a violation I couldn't quite articulate. "I wasn't aware I needed permission to discuss paint colors," I said, trying to keep my voice level. Patricia's laugh was like ice cubes clinking in a glass. "Of course you need approval for any exterior modifications. It's all in the covenants you signed when you purchased your home. I trust you did read them before signing." The way she said it made it clear she knew the answer. "I skimmed them," I admitted, immediately regretting the honesty. "Well, then let me clarify for you. Section 4.2.1 states that all exterior paint colors must complement the existing neighborhood aesthetic. Black is absolutely not on our approved color palette. In fact, it's specifically prohibited under our community harmony guidelines." She reached into her blazer and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This is your first official notice. You have 14 days to submit a paint color proposal to the Architectural Review Committee for approval. Failure to comply will result in a fine of $100 per day until the violation is corrected." I stared at the paper in her outstretched hand, my mind reeling. "But I haven't even bought the paint yet. How can I be in violation of something I haven't done?" "Intent to violate community standards is itself a violation," Patricia said smoothly. "Consider this a courtesy warning. Most residents don't get such consideration." After she left, I stood in my driveway holding that piece of paper like it was a coiled snake. The words community harmony kept echoing in my head. What about my harmony? What about my right to make my house feel like home? That evening, I called my sister Lisa, who lived 3 states away but had been my rock since David's death. "She can't fine you for something you haven't done," Lisa said, her voice crackling through the phone. "That's insane. I'm starting to think this whole neighborhood is insane," I replied, looking out my kitchen window at the rows of identical houses. "It's like living in Stepford." "So what are you going to do?" I was quiet for a long moment, thinking about David, about the blue house that had made him smile, about the sunflowers I'd planted that morning in defiance of the neighborhood's beige monotony. "I'm going to paint my house black," I said finally. "It's my house. I should be able to paint it whatever color I want. Lisa was quiet for a moment. Are you sure about this, Sar? Maybe you could find a compromise. A nice gray, maybe? But I was done compromising. I'd compromised away too much already, our old life, our memories, our home. This house was supposed to be our fresh start, not another prison with different walls. The next morning, I drove to Home Depot and bought 12 gallons of charcoal. Dream, the exact shade of black I'd fallen in love with online. The teenage clerk who helped load them into my car looked impressed. That's going to look awesome, he said. Most people are too scared to go bold with house colors. Yeah, I said, thinking about Patricia Morrison's sharp smile. Most people are. I started painting that weekend. Emma helped me with a primer, her little hands, carefully painting the porch railings while I tackled the main walls. We worked too, her favorite playlist, singing along to Taylor Swift and making plans for how we'd decorate for Halloween. It's going to be the coolest house on the street, Emma said, stepping back to admire our progress. Like a castle. She was right. As the black paint went on, our house transformed from generic suburban box to something that commanded attention. The white trim popped against the dark backdrop. The red door I'd painted the week before looked stunning, and the whole thing had a character that made my heart soar. That's when Patricia Morrison declared war. The first fine arrived on Monday, exactly as promised, $100 for each day I'd been painting. But this one came with additional charges, $50 for unauthorized exterior modifications, $25 for disruption of community aesthetics, and another $50 for failure to obtain proper permits. By the end of the week, I owed the HOA $1,225. I called the HOA office, a cramped room in the community center that smelled like old coffee and disappointment. Patricia answered on the first ring. Willowbrook Estates HOA, Patricia speaking. Mrs. Morrison, this is Sarah Chun from 1247 Maple Street. I received your fine notice, and I think there's been a mistake. You're charging me for permits, but I was never told I needed any permits to paint my house. Oh, there's no mistake, dear. Patricia's voice oozed false sweetness. Section 3.4.7 requires all exterior modifications to have proper architectural committee approval, which constitutes a permit in our system. Since you failed to obtain approval, you're in violation of that section as well. But you can't retroactively create violations, I protested. I'm not a lawyer, but that doesn't seem legal. Patricia's laugh was like nails on a chalkboard. Mrs. Chun, when you purchased your home in Willowbrook Estates, you agreed to abide by our covenants, conditions, and restrictions. Those covenants give the HOA broad authority to maintain community standards. If you're unhappy with our enforcement, you're welcome to take it up with the board at our next meeting. It's the third Thursday of every month at 7 p.m. She hung up before I could respond. The board meeting was held in the community center, the same building that housed Patricia's office. I arrived 15 minutes early, hoping to get a sense of how these things worked before jumping into the lion's den. The room was set up like a courtroom, with a long table at the front for the board members and folding chairs arranged in rows for residents. Patricia sat at the center of the board table like a queen holding court. To her left was Harold Blackwood, a retired accountant who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. To her right was Jennifer Walsh, a perfectly coiffed real estate agent who nodded along with everything Patricia said like a bobblehead doll. About 20 residents were scattered throughout the folding chairs, most of them looking as nervous as I felt. I recognized a few faces from around the neighborhood but didn't know any names. First order of business, Patricia announced, not bothering with any of the usual meeting pleasantries, is the ongoing violation at 1247 Maple Street. My face burned as every head in the room turned to look at me. I'd expected to have a chance to speak my piece, to explain my position. Instead, I was apparently the opening act. Mrs. Chun has willfully violated Section 4.2.1 of our community covenants by painting her home an unapproved color, despite receiving official notice of the violation. Patricia continued. The Architectural Review Committee has unanimously rejected her color choice as incompatible with community standards. Wait, I said, standing up. I never submitted anything to the Architectural Review Committee. How could they reject something I never applied for? Patricia's smile was predatory. Your intent to paint was clear from your actions. The committee reviewed your color choice based on the current state of your home and found it unacceptable. That's not how this works, I said, my voice rising. You can't reject an application I never submitted. Mrs. Chun, Harold spoke up for the first time, his voice tired. Perhaps we could work out a compromise. What if you painted the house a nice charcoal gray? Instead, something that would still give you the dark color you want but be more in keeping with community standards? I looked around the room at the faces staring back at me. Some looked sympathetic, others annoyed that I was disrupting their evening. But all of them looked resigned, like they'd been beaten down by this system long before I'd arrived. No, I said quietly. It's my house. I'm not hurting anyone. And black isn't some offensive color. It's a classic house color that looks beautiful. Patricia's mask slipped for just a moment, and I saw something cold and vindictive in her eyes. Mrs. Chun, if you continue with this violation, the fines will continue to accrue. Currently, you owe $1,225. That amount will increase by $225 per day until you bring your property into compliance. $225? I gasped. The original fine was $100. The daily fine increases for ongoing violations. Jennifer Walsh spoke up, consulting a binder thick with rules and regulations. After the first week, it jumps to $225. After 2 weeks, it's $350 per day. I felt the room spinning around me. At $225 per day, I'd owe over $1,500 per week. Even with David's life insurance money, I couldn't sustain that kind of bleeding. This is insane, I said, my voice shaking. You're trying to bankrupt me over paint color. Patricia stood up, her perfectly pressed suit making her look like a corporate executioner. Mrs. Chun, this association exists to protect property values for all residents. Your selfish decision to ignore community standards affects every homeowner in Willowbrook Estates. The board has a fiduciary duty to enforce our covenants. As I walked out of that meeting, my hands shaking with rage and fear, I made a decision. Patricia Morrison wanted a war. She was about to get one. But first, I needed to understand exactly what I was up against. That night, after Emma went to bed, I spread the HOA covenants across my kitchen table like a battle plan. All 63 pages of legal jargon that I'd blindly signed in my eagerness to give my daughter a safe home. As I read through the documents with fresh eyes, a pattern began to emerge that made my stomach churn. This wasn't just about paint colors. The HOA had given itself sweeping powers that would make a dictator jealous. Section 4.2.1 didn't just regulate paint colors. It gave the Architectural Review Committee the right to approve or deny any exterior modification, no matter how minor. Mailbox replacement, committee approval required. Garden gnomes, prohibited without exception. Holiday decorations, limited to 30 days per year, and subject to aesthetic review. But Section 5.3.2 was what really caught my attention. It gave the HOA the right to place a lien on any property with outstanding fines exceeding $5,000, and to initiate foreclosure proceedings if those fines weren't paid within 90 days. They weren't trying to get me to repaint my house. They were trying to steal it. I started making phone calls. The first was to a real estate attorney named Marcus Webb, who specialized in HOA disputes. His consultation fee was $300, money I could barely afford with the fines piling up. But I needed to know where I stood legally. Mrs. Chun, Marcus said after reviewing my documents, I'm going to be straight with you. This HOA has some of the most aggressive enforcement powers I've ever seen. The covenant language is broad enough to give them almost unlimited authority over exterior modifications. But they're fining me for something I haven't even finished yet, I protested. How is that legal? Marcus sighed. Unfortunately, the way this particular covenant is written, intent to violate is treated the same as an actual violation. It's unusual, but not illegal. The bigger problem is the escalating fine structure. At $225 per day, increasing. Every 2 weeks, you'll hit the $5,000 lien threshold in about 3 weeks. My heart sank. So what are my options? Honestly, not many. You could file a lawsuit challenging the fines, but that would cost tens of thousands in legal fees, with no guarantee of success. You could repaint the house, but you'd still owe the accumulated fines. Or, he paused, you could look for violations on their end. HOAs have to follow their own rules and state regulations. If they've overstepped their authority or failed to follow proper procedures, that could give you leverage. After hanging up with Marcus, I made my second call. Lisa, I need you to help me with some research, I said when my sister answered. What kind of research? The kind that might save my house. Lisa had always been the detail-oriented one in our family. While I was dreaming and creating, she was fact-checking and organizing. If anyone could help me find cracks in Patricia Morrison's armor, it was her. Send me everything, Lisa said. HOA documents, meeting minutes, whatever you can get your hands on. I'll start digging. The next morning, I filed a public records request with the county for all HOA-related documents. Texas Sunshine laws meant they had to provide meeting minutes, financial records, and correspondence related to the association's business. It would take a few days to process, but it was a start. While I waited, I decided to do some old-fashioned detective work. If Patricia Morrison was running the HOA like her personal fiefdom, there had to be other residents who'd been burned by her power trips. I started with my immediate neighbors. The Johnsons had been friendly when we first moved in, but I'd noticed they'd become more distant after the painting controversy started. When I knocked on their door Thursday evening, Margaret Johnson answered with a nervous smile. Oh, hi, Sarah. How are things? They've been better, I said honestly. I was wondering if I could ask you about your experience with the HOA. Have you ever had any issues with them? Margaret glanced over her shoulder, then stepped out onto her porch and closed the door behind her. You didn't hear this from me, she whispered. But Patricia Morrison has been a nightmare for this neighborhood. She's fined people for the stupidest things: wrong shade of mulch, garden hoses left out overnight, kids' toys visible from the street. How long has she been president? For years. And every year it gets worse. She's got Harold and Jennifer wrapped around her finger, so the board just rubber stamps whatever she wants. Has anyone ever challenged her? Margaret's expression darkened. The Kowalskis tried 2 years ago. She buried them in fines until they had to sell their house and move. The Patels fought back. When she tried to make them remove their vegetable garden, she found some obscure rule about agricultural activities and made their lives hell until they gave up. Why doesn't anyone report her to the county or state? Because she's smart about it, Margaret said. She never breaks any laws. Technically, she just uses the HOA rules to make people miserable. And most people don't have the money or energy to fight back. Margaret wasn't the only one with stories. Over the next week, I talked to a dozen neighbors, and the pattern was always the same. Patricia Morrison used the HOA like a weapon against anyone who didn't conform to her vision of suburban perfection. The Hendersons had been fined $500 for parking their son's motorcycle in their own driveway. The Changs received a violation notice for having excessive bird feeders. They had 3. The Williams family was still fighting $2,000 in fines for installing a playground set that was allegedly too colorful for community standards. But it was my conversation with Ben Martinez that gave me the first real crack in Patricia's armor. Ben lived 3 streets over, and his story was the most disturbing yet. 6 months ago, his elderly mother had moved in with his family after a stroke. She used a wheelchair, so Ben had installed a small ramp from their front porch to the sidewalk. Patricia hit us with a $150 fine for unauthorized structural modifications, Ben explained as we sat on his back patio, safely out of sight from any nosy neighbors. I explained that it was a medical necessity, that we had documentation from Mom's doctor. Didn't matter. She said we needed architectural committee approval, even though the Americans with Disabilities Act specifically protects accessibility modifications. Did you fight it? I tried. I brought the ADA regulations to the next board meeting, printed out the relevant sections. Patricia said federal law didn't override HOA covenants and that we needed to go through proper channels. But here's the thing, when I submitted the formal application for approval, it sat on her desk for 3 months. 3 months while the fines kept piling up. What happened? Ben's jaw tightened. We had to take out a loan to pay the fines. $8,000 for a wheelchair ramp that cost me $200 and a weekend to build. That night, I called Lisa with an update on my research. The public records came in, she said without preamble. And Sarah, you're not going to believe what I found. What is it? Patricia Morrison has been embezzling money from the HOA. I nearly dropped the phone. What? The financial records show regular payments to something called Morrison Consulting Services for community management fees. Guess who owns Morrison Consulting Services? Patricia. Bingo. She's been paying herself $3,000 a month on top of her board salary for services that are already covered by the management company. I also found payments to her husband's landscaping company that are way above market rate, and she's been using HOA funds to pay for her personal legal expenses. My mind was racing. How much are we talking about? Over the past 2 years? At least $150,000, maybe more. I sat in my kitchen, staring at my black walls, while Lisa's words sank in. Patricia Morrison had been stealing from the very community she claimed to protect. No wonder she was so aggressive about collecting fines. She needed the money to cover her theft. Lisa, I need you to help me document everything. Every payment, every invoice, every suspicious transaction. Already on it. But Sarah, be careful. If she's willing to steal this much money, she won't hesitate to destroy you to protect herself. As I hung up the phone, I looked around my beautiful black house and smiled for the first time in weeks. Patricia Morrison thought she could intimidate me into submission with her fines and her threats. What she didn't realize was that she'd just handed me the ammunition I needed to take her down. The war was about to begin in earnest, and I was no longer fighting just for my house. I was fighting for every neighbor who'd been bullied into silence, every family who'd been driven out by trumped-up fines, every person who'd been too scared to stand up to a bully with a clipboard. Patricia Morrison was about to learn that some fights are worth everything. The next HOA board meeting was scheduled for Thursday, October 15th. I spent the 2 weeks leading up to it like a general preparing for battle. Lisa had compiled a devastating dossier of financial irregularities. Marcus Webb had coached me on legal strategy, and I quietly reached out to every neighbor who'd been wronged by Patricia's reign of terror. By Wednesday night, I had commitments from 15 families to attend the meeting. People who'd been scared into silence for years were finally ready to speak up, armed with the knowledge that Patricia's house of cards was about to come crashing down. I barely slept the night before the meeting. Emma sensed my tension and crawled into my bed around midnight, curling up against me like she used to do after David died. "Mommy, are we going to have to move?" she whispered in the dark. "No, baby," I said, stroking her hair. "We're not going anywhere. This is our home." The community center was packed when I arrived at 6:45 p.m. Word had somehow spread beyond my recruited neighbors, and nearly 50 people filled the folding chairs. I could feel the electricity in the air, This wasn't going to be a typical rubber stamp meeting. Patricia sat at her usual place at the board table, looking composed and confident. She probably thought this was just another routine gathering where she'd announce my latest fines and maybe berate a few other residents for minor infractions. The woman had no idea that her world was about to explode. Harold and Jennifer flanked her as usual, but I noticed both of them looked nervous. Jennifer kept shuffling through her binder, and Harold wouldn't make eye contact with anyone in the audience. "Good evening, everyone," Patricia began in her usual imperious tone. "We have quite a crowd tonight. I hope this means more people are taking an interest in maintaining our community standards." She launched into her prepared agenda: financial reports that were complete, fiction, updates on architectural improvements that were really just her personal pet projects, and the usual reminder about compliance with community guidelines. "Now, regarding the ongoing violation at 1247 Maple Street," she said, her eyes finding me in the crowd like a hawk spotting prey. "Mrs. Chen's fines have now reached $7,350, and the board has voted to file a lien against the property. If payment isn't received within 30 days, we'll proceed with foreclosure proceedings." A murmur rippled through the crowd. $7,000 was more than many families made in months, and everyone knew Patricia was essentially stealing my house over paint color. I stood up slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Actually, Mrs. Morrison, I'd like to address the board about some irregularities I've discovered in the HOA's financial management." Patricia's smile faltered for just a moment before snapping back into place. "Mrs. Chun, if you have questions about your fines, you can schedule an appointment to—" "I'm not talking about my fines," I interrupted, my voice carrying across the silent room. "I'm talking about the money you've been stealing from this community." The room erupted. Patricia's face went white, then flushed red as people started shouting questions and demanding answers. She banged her gavel repeatedly, but the crowd had tasted blood and wouldn't be silenced. "That's a serious accusation, Mrs. Chun," Patricia said, her voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "I hope you have proof to back up such slanderous claims." I pulled out a thick folder and approached the board table. "I have 3 years of financial records obtained through public records requests. They show regular payments to Morrison Consulting Services, a company you own, for services that are already provided by our management company. They show payments to Morrison Landscaping, your husband's business, that are 300% above market rate, and they show HOA funds being used to pay your personal legal expenses." Patricia shot to her feet, her composure finally cracking. "How dare you? I've given for years of my life to this community, working to maintain property values, and you've stolen over $150,000, I said loudly, cutting her off. "Money that should have gone to community improvements, to lowering HOA fees, to actually serving the residents instead of lining your pockets." Jennifer Walsh was frantically flipping through her binder, her face pale. Harold had slumped in his chair like a deflated balloon. "Did you know about this?" someone shouted at Harold. "We never saw these payments," Harold said weakly. "Patricia handles all the financial authorizations. She said it was standard practice." The crowd was getting uglier by the minute. Margaret Johnson stood up and pointed an accusing finger at Patricia. "You fined us $300 for having the wrong color mailbox while you were stealing thousands. My husband worked overtime for months to pay your ridiculous fines." Ben Martinez was on his feet next. $8,000 in fines for a wheelchair ramp for my disabled mother, while you were paying yourself consulting fees. Patricia tried to regain control, banging her gavel and shouting for order, but it was too late. The dam had burst, and years of suppressed anger were flooding out. "Furthermore," I continued, my voice rising above the chaos, "I've documented dozens of violations by the HOA itself. You've failed to provide required financial disclosures to homeowners. You've assessed fines without following the dispute process outlined in your own covenants, and you violated state regulations on HOA governance. I turned to address the crowd. Patricia Morrison has been running this association like her personal kingdom, stealing your money and using trumped-up fines to force out anyone who questions her authority. But she made one mistake. She picked the wrong person to mess with. Patricia was trembling with rage, her perfectly styled mask completely fallen. Away. You have no right to. I have every right. I shouted back. I'm a homeowner in this community, and you work for us, not the other way around. Or at least you did, until tonight. I pulled out another sheet of paper. I've already filed complaints with the county District Attorney's Office for embezzlement and fraud. I've reported the HOA to the State Real Estate Commission for violations of governance regulations. And I've filed a lawsuit in district court seeking damages for harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and violation of my property rights. The room was dead silent now. Patricia's face had gone from red to ashen gray. Jennifer was openly crying, and Harold looked like he wanted to disappear through the floor. But here's what I'm really proud of, I said, my voice dropping to a conversational level that somehow carried more weight than all the shouting. As of this morning, I have signatures from 67 homeowners, more than the 51% required, calling for a special election to remove the entire board and elect new leadership. Patricia sank into her chair like she'd been physically struck. For years of absolute power gone in a single evening. The petition has been filed with the county and will be processed within 30 days, I continued. At that time, we'll have a real election with real candidates who actually care about this community instead of treating it like their personal piggy bank. Margaret Johnson started clapping. Then Ben Martinez joined in. Within seconds, the entire room was on their feet, applauding and cheering like their team had just won the World Series. Through the noise, I could hear Patricia trying to speak, but no one was listening anymore. Her authority had evaporated like morning mist. She gathered her papers with shaking hands and fled the room, Jennifer trailing behind her like a lost puppy. Harold remained in his chair, looking shell-shocked. I never knew, he said to no one in particular. I thought she was just thorough. As the crowd began to disperse, people kept approaching me to shake my hand, to thank me, to share their own stories of Patricia's abuse. The Hendersons told me they were getting their motorcycle fine refunded. The Williams family said they were finally going to put that playground set back up. But the moment that meant the most came when Ben Martinez approached me, with tears in his eyes. My mom's been living with us for 8 months now, he said quietly. Every time she looks at that ramp, she apologizes for costing us so much money. She thinks it's her fault we had to take out a loan. That's going to change, I promised him. All of it. As I drove home that night, past houses that looked exactly the same as they had 6 months ago but somehow felt completely different, I thought about David. He would have been proud of what I'd done tonight. Not just fighting for our house, but fighting for our neighbors, for what was right. Emma was asleep when I got home, but I peeked into her room anyway. My beautiful, brave little girl who'd helped me paint our house black, who'd stood by me through everything, who deserved to grow up knowing that sometimes the good guys really do win. Our house looked magnificent in the moonlight, its black walls absorbing the silver glow and giving it back as something rich and mysterious and uniquely ours. Patricia Morrison's war was over, and we had won. 3 months later, I was standing in my front yard again, but this time I wasn't alone. Emma was helping our new next-door neighbors, the Patel family, plant a vegetable garden that would have given Patricia Morrison a coronary. Tomatoes, peppers, herbs, and even a small patch of corn. Everything the old agricultural activities rule would have forbidden. The special election had been a landslide. Patricia, Jennifer, and Harold were voted out by margins that would have embarrassed a totalitarian dictator. The new board, led by Ben Martinez as president and Margaret Johnson as vice president, had their first order of business, formally approving my black house and issuing a public apology for the harassment I'd endured. They also voted to refund every penny of the bogus fines Patricia had assessed. Over the years, my $7,350 went right back into the community fund, where it belonged. The criminal investigation was still ongoing, but Patricia had already reached a plea agreement with the district attorney. She would repay the stolen money, serve 2 years of probation, and was permanently banned from serving on any HOA board in the state. Her husband's landscaping company lost all its contracts with area HOAs, and their house, ironically painted a boring beige, went up for sale the week after the election. But the best part wasn't the justice, as satisfying as that was. The best part was watching our neighborhood come alive. The Changs added 2 more bird feeders and a butterfly garden. The Williams family's colorful playground was the hit of the block. Kids from 3 streets over came to play on the swing set that was allegedly too colorful for community standards. The Henderson's son started a motorcycle club that met in their driveway every Saturday morning, and Margaret Johnson painted her front door bright purple. "Life's too short for boring colors," she told me when I complimented her on it. I almost cried when she said that. It was exactly what David used to say. The new HOA board had revised the covenants to eliminate most of the petty restrictions Patricia had used as weapons. Homeowners could now paint their houses any color they wanted as long as it wasn't intentionally offensive. Holiday decorations could stay up for 2 months instead of 30 days. Kids' toys were allowed in front yards. Dogs could be walked without leashes in the common areas. We were still a community with standards, but they were reasonable standards, designed to maintain property values, not control every aspect of our lives. Emma had blossomed in the new environment. She was student council treasurer at school and had organized a neighborhood Halloween party that drew families from outside Willowbrook Estates. Our Black House had become the unofficial headquarters for the celebration, its dramatic color scheme perfect for the spooky decorations Emma insisted on hanging from every available surface. "Mommy," she said one evening as we sat on our front porch swing watching the sunset, "I'm glad we painted our house black." "Why's that, baby?" "Because it made us brave. And when you're brave, good things happen. Sometimes the wisdom of 8-year-olds can take your breath away." I'd learned something important through this whole ordeal. Home isn't just about the 4 walls around you. It's about the community you're part of, the neighbors who become friends, the feeling that you belong somewhere, and that somewhere is worth fighting for. David had been right about colors making you happy, but he'd been right about something else too. Life really is too short to let bullies steal your joy. 6 months ago, I thought I was just painting my house. What I'd actually done was paint a target on Patricia Morrison's back and expose the corruption that had been festering in our community for years. Sometimes one act of defiance is all it takes to bring down a tyrant. Our house still stands black and beautiful against the Texas sky. But more than that, it stands as a symbol that ordinary people can win extraordinary victories when they refuse to back down from what's right. Emma and I still live at 1247 Maple Street, in a house the color of midnight dreams and stubborn hope. And every time I pull into our driveway, past the sunflowers that tower over our porch like golden guardians, I smile and think about what David would say if he could see us now. He'd probably say the same thing he always said. When you walk up to your house, it should make you happy. It does, David. Every single day it does. The HOA tried to take our home. Instead, they gave us a community worth living in. And that's a victory that no amount of fines could ever touch.